everyone. Welcome to Atrium. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Guigo, Pichigo, and Gadigal people of the Orinoco, and pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Thank you for coming to Atrium. It's actually a nice day today for a change. We have this artist conversation with the two artists who are currently having their solo exhibitions in the gallery. On my right, we have Keith Fyfe, and on my left, we have McEwan. So Keith is a painter. He does this very interesting landscape, sort of miniature landscape, which a lot of them are done on color charts, sample color charts. Keith have exhibited quite widely. He's actually a teacher for quite a long time, but obviously also practicing as an artist. And he's won a lot of art prizes as well as being finalist in a lot of landscape prizes. So this is Keith's second solo exhibition with us. Vic is one of our latest artists that we started representing. Vic is actually very much involved in music as well. I think I should turn this up a little bit more. Yeah, it's not doing anything. Yeah, that's good. Hello? Yeah, that's better. Yeah. So Vic is a musician, but he's also involved in a lot of things. He basically had this organization called Cat Factory, and he's doing his music. He's doing a research fellowship, is that right? Music. But this body of work, which I'll get to talk more about later, but this body of work, he developed it as part of his residency at the National Museum. And it's very interesting in that he basically went through the collection of photos at the museum, and he decided to project these photos. He's very patient. He goes out to this lake area and just keep waiting until, at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever, until they have this fog or fine mist, and then he projects these photo images onto the mist, and then he actually take photos of it. So it's quite an involved, interesting exercise, and this is what you get as a result. So we're going to find out a lot more about both of them, their practice and so on. So maybe I'll start off with Keith first. This body of work called Prevailing Conditions, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how you develop this body of work, and this sort of practice of doing very miniature landscape. How you decide to focus doing that, and also why the color charts.
It's easy, the color charts are free from Bunnings. I can take you on a tour of Bunnings and show you how to read them off the rack without anyone knowing. I did have a problem once actually, because it was Taubman's colours. Taubman used to have these really interesting books of colours which you tore, remember stamps, so you get those things. So they used to have these really lovely things. Then they stopped making. I went in one day and there's no more left, and I got such a shock. I went to the person who worked on the counter. I said, why have you stopped making these? Oh, we're making them different now. And I said, do you have any left? And she said, yes, there's some in the cupboard down there, but you can't have them because it costs us about $2 each to print them. Wow. And I said, but you're not using them, so they're just going to sit there. You can't have them. So I went home and I told Caroline, my wife, and I said, I thought it was really mean that she just gave me, she showed me that there was a batch of them like this. And she said, you know, that assistant will finish their shift about 2. Just go back. And I went back after 2, and there's another guy there. I told him, "You got any old?" "Yeah, here you go." So, yeah, where there's a will, there's a way. So, I started with these because when I used to be teaching full time, I tried doing big paintings, and 6 months later I hadn't finished it, and I was losing the plot. And if you're not working continuously on something, I find it just evaporates. You know, the time has moved on, you've moved on. I could never finish anything. And a friend of mine had these little booklets of Porter's paints, all those beautiful colours of Porter's. And they lent us it, and we picked some colours from it. And I had this chart, she didn't want it back. And I was going to throw it out, and I looked at it, it's so beautiful. I just picked up pencils and started scribbling on the little rectangles. And I got quite involved in it, I really enjoyed it. And I realised, oh, little landscape. I did the whole book in one go. And I thought, it wasn't necessarily any good, but I thought, some of them are all right. So that's when I started to go to Bunnings to see what charts they had. And lo and behold, they had all these things. So each country I go to, I go and find the colours. There's some nice snowboard-looking ones in New Zealand, kind of shaped like a snowboard. I got some of those, very good. The reason I use them as well, they've got a very hard surface because they're printed in industrial inks. So you can really work into them quite hard and even cut into them, etch into them. So a piece of paper doesn't do that, you'll just tear. So I find that those little things work really well for me. So I keep going with them, so I'm quite fascinated by them. And also it allows me to work very quickly. And if I get bogged down, it doesn't work. Anything I've done in a calculated way where I've pre-planned and then executed, it really is a load of crap. Seriously, it is so bad, I just want to shoot myself. So anything that I decide to do, it doesn't work. But things that appear to me, I just recognize them, and then I work on them because it's told me, it sounds a bit weird, it's told me what I have to do to it. I don't make any decisions, it just kind of evolves. So I really like that way of working. I find it still very exciting to do that. So that's how it all began.
Right. Very interesting, Chris. So Vic, you still are a musician to start off with. So what makes you decide to go into this project with the National Museum? So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that, and also a little bit more about this particular project.
Sure. So I think our practice, me and my partner Sarah here, we were both musicians. We met as musicians, and then slowly over time, particularly when we moved from the inner city of Sydney out to Narrandera, so in between Wagga Wagga and Griffith is where we were located, in an old schoolhouse. It was built in 1886. It's 30 kilometres out of Narrandera, so surrounded by paddocks. Farmers get angry when I call them fields. It's fields are productive, paddocks are. And so when we moved out there, just slowly our practice really started to change. We started to learn about things we didn't know about here, like water allocation, what that means. And suddenly we just started making work out in the landscapes, out with the environments and with people. And so although there's often a sort of sound thread in a lot of our works, visual installation, different ways of working started kind of coming out. And then I was invited to be the artist in residence at the National Museum of Australia in Canberra for a year, so that's maybe a 3-hour drive from Narrandera where we live. So I'd go there, maybe stay for a week or two every now and then. It was all quite sort of flexible. At first, the first thing I made there was they've got a paddle steamer, the PS Enterprise, out the front there, which is the oldest still floating paddle steamer in the Southern Hemisphere, I think. And I actually offered to turn it into an instrument and bow it with the cello bow as a performance. And so as they were trying to get their head around that concept, they phoned me one day to say, we're having a concert in front of that paddle steamer with Katie Noonan. We expect about 1,000 people to come. This sound, do you think you would get, do you think that would be good as a support act for Katie Noonan? And I said, I think it would be perfect. So then I went and I was Katie Noonan's support act. She didn't speak to me. But there was about 1,000 people there, and I played the pedal steel with the cello, so I turned it. And that sort of part of my practice is all in my mind about trying to give sound to these practical objects, to say they've had this life, this long history on our inland rivers, and that has us trying to create a soundtrack to that, trying to extract the sound from these things. So that's a big part of my, I moved from piano to playing things like pedal steelers. And so then this work, because a lot of the work we've been doing was really about what role artists actually can play in the world, how do we engage with farmers, with river management, with conflict around, say, after the Minity Fish Kill events where we did work with community there. How do we also let go of the control of the artist in another way? And so this was an idea I had for quite a while about whether you could project into environmental conditions, so something that you couldn't control, so in this case fog, but project images into it and re-photograph it to make paintings. I was really, because I couldn't paint, as being a bit of a struggling painter, I thought I'd try and do it this way. And so being at the museum meant I could access the resources to do that. They had a big projector in a weatherproof enclosure. And so then really it was these two images here, which are the wheat samples. This was the start of this whole project, where in the museum they have a pile of wheat seeds, and really what those wheat seeds represent was the development of these, which the laboratory where these were made, these strains of wheat, is just outside Canberra, and really they allowed agriculture to move in that, because these new strains could be grown in those conditions. And so that's celebrated in the National Museum, as it should be, but also there's other sides to that story. There's loss that came with that as well. And so this project started from that point to say, how do we, whenever we try to have conversations about these things, the positive aspects of progress and the negatives, usually we have them with conflict, but how do we actually just have them? How do we just have those conversations? So this became about, I wonder if we projected items that in some way are related to this story of people moving inland and actually using our landscape for food production on a massive scale, and abstracted them by projecting them into fog. Can we then think about them differently and have different types of conversations? And so that's what the sort of idea of this work was. That nothing here has been computer manipulated. Everything was just photographs that I took of objects in the museum, then projected, and then that fog did all the animation and manipulation for me. And it was really, as you sort of mentioned, we worked with the Bureau of Meteorology to try to pick when there would be fog. And they said, if you could move this project up to, say, where Canberra Airport is, we always know where that fog's coming from. At this location, it was on the Murrumbidgee. It was actually at the location where the laboratory still stands as a historic little building where the wheat seeds were made. So we wanted to do the work at that spot, which was now private property. And so the museum set up this projector, got permission from the private landholders who now own it. It was set up for 3 months. So we would get emails from the Bureau of Meteorology saying maybe between Thursday and Saturday you might get fog. So we'd go there, and either 8 o'clock at night we'd go and we'd wait there till whenever we got tired, like 3 a.m. Or we would set our alarms at 1 a.m, get up, go out there and wait till dawn. For 2.5 months we did that. And I remember the night where we got the first, and there was no fog, and sometimes the museum would say, what's happening? Is this going to work? I go, well, I told you it might not work. It was about 2.5 months later, I was driving with George Mann, the curator from the National Museum, in his car, and it was maybe 2 a.m. And as we were driving through this property, we could see it was just filled with fog. And we were so excited, we were screaming like little kids, and then George was driving, and he crashed his car into a wombat hole, and he couldn't get it out. And then I got out of the car and went, screw the car! Went running down, and then George joined me, and so we spent the night. And then after that, we got maybe 2 more nights of fog, so we would just stay there till dawn, and a nice little sort of droplet, and we're just seeing that, so the easiest way to understand it is that typewriter picture. That picture next to it is the same frame later that night when fog came. So the exact same image, it's a typewriter, but it's projected into fog. So it's really about, that typewriter was Mary Gilmore's typewriter, who was on the $5 note. So she wrote about those landscapes in the Murrumbidgee River. And so that image is then reanimating the typewriter she used to write about that landscape. So it's reanimated by that landscape. So that was sort of the idea behind the work. And this is 15 of 64 works in the original show.
Yeah. So it is only a fraction of what you did. Yeah. Keith, your landscape, I understand that you actually do travel around a bit, looking at landscape, but at the same time, a lot of the works are mostly imagined landscape, is that right? Yeah, and then you sort of sometimes come across one that looks like what you found here. So with all these images, do you sort of like, in your mind, have a preconceived sort of image of what it should be, or do you sort of like try and do it and just see where it goes as you develop?
I don't start with an image or a place, and so again I've tried to go out to a place, do the sketching and drawing, painting, but again it doesn't really work. I find being out in the landscape, in the bush, there's too much information for my poor little brain to compute. I can't sort it out. Whereas I'm absorbing it at the time that I'm looking at it and walking through it, and I know that it's back in here. So over the years, when I started painting, I make marks and then not anything until they become a landscape, and then I see it, and then I embellish it, and then I know what light on a rock is, and there's going to be a shadow and the colours. And so the better ones, I'm almost in the landscape when I'm doing it, because I know what I'm walking through, and I create it basically from everything I've ever experienced. And so they're very generic in a sense, but how many combinations can you have of cloud, sky, rock, bush, whatever? There are billions of combinations. So again, some of these work, I've got thousands and thousands which are rubbish. Okay, these are the ones that have made the cut. But I've got so many that just don't work, and after a point working on it, I get frustrated, and I thought, let's just throw it away. But I never throw them away, because I can't. So I put them in a box, and then I put a label on, rejects, and then a couple of years later, I'll see this box, rejects, okay, and I'll open it up and I'll look it through, and I thought, that's not bad. And I find it really tells you about the way you perceive something. It's not about the thing itself. So again, when I look at in the Archibald super realistic photographic painting, I'm wowed by the virtuosity of it. But to me, it's not interesting, because if I go back the next day, it's going to look exactly the same, and then 2 months later, it'll look exactly the same. Whereas something that's more abstracted, you will discover things that you never saw before. So, in the half light, you see something differently. So I'm painting something, and I think it's this, and I go in the next day and I walk past it, and it's actually not, it's something else. So then I go and do the something else. So it's forever inventing itself, and I'm just really the witness who spots it, finishes it off. So again, I prefer that. I prefer not to be the author. I prefer to be the witness.
So in that sense, I presume you never do anything plein air on the spot then? So.
Very little. Yeah, very little. I do take stuff out into the bush, but I'll find I'm in the bush and I'll start looking at a dead tree, and I'll start doing that. And then pretty soon I'm doing mountains and lakes. I just like being in the bush.
Yeah, exactly.
It's conducive to painting something else.
And also, I believe that you don't necessarily use a paintbrush to do your painting.
No, I because you can't compete with the great artists with paintbrushes, so I have to make something that I can't control, and so I make weird kind of tools with. I collect sticks in the bush and seed pods and leaves and things, and I stick them all together with string and silicone and plaster and band-aids, and end up with these bizarre kind of tools, and then I will dip one of that into some paint or some ink and start making marks, and the thing goes a bit crazy because I'm twisting and turning it, but I'm looking for the clue, and then eventually there it is. It will appear or it doesn't appear, so it goes in the reject box, but I'll see you later.
I think Keith did a drawing workshop for us last time in the exhibition.
We made
And yeah, he brought in a lot of these sort of like tree branches and twigs, and then he said to everyone, just go out there and find whatever you can. And just put that in. So,
it's like Bunnings as well, it's all free. It's a very economical way of working.
That's right, yeah. So, Vic, you also have this cat factory. It's a not-for-profit organization which you set up. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this particular bit of work that you do.
So the cat factory started here in Sydney in a warehouse in Marrickville. It was kind of a legal underground venue that would host gigs and would have exhibitions there once a month. But it was also a part of the community that we were part of. So we wouldn't advertise it; people would just turn up. And so then at some point we discovered this old schoolhouse for sale outside Miranda for $15,000. They got the first home buyers grant for $7,000. And beautiful old schoolhouse out on 2 acres out of town. It was falling apart, of course, but we fixed it. And we never intended to move there. The aim of it was just to give to other artists. We were thinking this is a way for us to support our arts community without needing funding. So we could just say, have this place for a few weeks or a month, whatever you want. Come back and just tell us what you did, and that's it. So it was really just about building our community. But then we started spending a lot of time there. We started thinking, why do we pay so much rent in Sydney? And we started just understanding the difference of being out in that place, being away from the static of the city, just in this quiet where we might, a car might go past our house once every 5 hours and we'll stop and go, and we have echidnas living under a house and scratch under the bedroom floorboards in the middle of the night and that sort of thing. But that shift is what really shifted the Cat Factory from being about music to sort of being about what now we call socially engaged arts. So, how can artists come out of their studios to engage with the world? So I did my PhD as the first artist accepted into the Faculty of Medicine, so as a contemporary experimental artist, so not as an arts therapist, and not doing traditional arts and health, but as a contemporary experimental artist. So, working in the facial nerve clinic, so with people with facial nerve paralysis, and understanding what role an artist can have in that sort of space. And so that sort of work, the Cat Factory over the years has become really interested in thinking about really what's in, now we have a Labor Party back in Bali, we have a national cultural policy again for the first time in a long time, and one of the aims of that policy is for the arts to talk or have impact on all portfolio areas. And I think that's something that we're really interested in. How can the arts infiltrate everything? How can they get into all of these different sectors, like first ever artists enrolled in the Faculty of Medicine? How can we actually do that? So we're at the moment really focused on the Murray-Darling, the river system and the conflict that exists around that. After the 2019 and 2023 fish kill events in Menindee, where you might know in 2019 there was 1 million dead fish that appeared on the Barker River, and in 2023 there was 30 million dead fish that appeared overnight. So of course there's no plan, nobody has it's not a skill that had been developed to say, how do we remove 30 million dead fish from the place that is the water source for this town, from the place that is a place for the Barkagee people, Barkagee meaning of the river, so that sick river full of 30 million dead totems was a really complex story. And so we worked with those communities after both of those fish kill events, but with scientists and government departments as well, to sort of say, how can we use the arts to sort of move through the conflict that's normally associated with this, and to sort of understand that we're not going to solve any of those problems unless we bring different knowledge systems together. So we weren't saying we were going to solve any of those issues with the arts, but what we were solving is, why don't we try to have the conversations without wanting to punch each other or yell at each other, or any of that, actually say we all have value and we all have different perspectives here. And so I think that the aim of that is really what the Cat Factory over the years has been sort of developed as interesting. But then again, that isn't separate completely from studio-based practice either. These things have a relationship. And,
So how do you decide which artists you would engage with, in the cat factory? So do you call for submission or is it?
Well, I think we do lots of different things. So sometimes Sarah and I just make works together. The things we do usually just sort of arise. We encounter the world and things happen. We happen to meet people that were involved in the Menindee Fistula events, some of the scientists. We knew some of the aunties up there, and that just emerged. And it really depends what we do. We're more and more trying to create opportunities for other artists as well. So sometimes we get funding and we put out opportunities and people apply, and so then we assess them. And other times we just invite people. If we're doing a project where we think, actually we need somebody who steals little paint samples from Bunnings and does landscapes, we know who to call.
It's a skill.
Yeah, I know, so, but I think it's very much like that. As we develop programs, we just think, we need someone who does this. I wonder if, that person that we know does it. I wonder if they'd be interested to come and join us. So it's sort of organic in that sense. And I think because we have a big part of bringing your arts practice out of the studio and into the world in that way is engagement with ethics, which was, I think maybe you might have one of the only galleries in Sydney that mentions the word ethics on your webpage, which was one of my attractions. But this concept of ethics becomes really important because you're actually dealing with the lives of other people, and particularly if there's conflict around it, or say the medical setting, like the trauma around illness. So, the artists we bring in for those sorts of projects need to be able to navigate that. It's complex work. You need to be able to juggle your artistic intent with the needs of someone else, but not forget your artistic intent. You have to create new ways for that to work together.
Great. So Keith, you actually have been an art teacher for a very long time until you more recently retired. So I think I speak to a lot of artists, and Cindy Chan, for instance, sort of complained to me that unlike the early days, when there are full-time jobs available for teaching art, really this day and age is hardly any, they're all casual, on contract and so on. And I remember talking to Lindy Lee when she was still teaching at SCA, and she was a bit concerned about actually stopping that and coming out to be a full-time artist because it just feels so, basically unknown and not a secure job. And so eventually she did it, and she's doing very well. But you obviously, was fortunate, or either fortunate or unfortunate, to have a full-time job as an art teacher. So do you find that it actually helps you because you have a secure income, or do you find that it actually holds you back because you can't devote as much time to your art as you would like?
No, I made the decision because I had a family, had my wife and 2 children. That's a commitment, and I can't say I'm going to try and be an artist and you can pay the bills or whatever. I felt that I needed to have a regular income to support the family, and there doesn't seem to be a time when you can stop doing that until they're much older. So I went the whole way with teaching, and but what I did get from it was I felt much mentally sharper, because particularly when you're working with senior students, they come to you with an idea and you think, that's okay, but yes, you could do a drawing of your dog, but is that really enough? So you talk, and then you'd say, well, what about looking into this and maybe this and maybe this? So all the time you're presenting solutions to a problem, and it's this interaction, the back and forth. So when you're talking about quite a few kids and then other classes, you're constantly using your mind, and it's very stimulating because you get ideas of your own from it. And I've got things which some of those students didn't actually get to do because they didn't think it's a good idea. I've still got them, the little record of those, that I'm going to do them one day, because I thought fucking good idea. So yeah, very stimulating. So in the end, I think it was a great benefit. And then reaching a point where I wasn't trying to be a professional artist took the load off me thinking, what do I produce in order to sell it? And I didn't really want to do it to sell it, I just wanted to do it. So it's a compulsion, as people know, when you're doing art. It's not really about selling it, so it's about, I must do it. You know, it's like music, you must do it. So that's why I did the two things, but I'm quite glad now that I don't rely on selling art. But they're still available. But yeah, I do think of young artists trying to make their way, particularly in this day and age. It's a constant struggle.
Yeah, it is very tough. I have to take my hat off to all the artists. You know, like they all know that, you know, it's very hard to make a living out of it, but a lot of them, they just said, well, we do it anyway. And obviously some ones like, including Keith, who managed to get a full-time job, that's good, you know, so, but otherwise it's a real struggle. So Vic, you are also a musician, so how do you juggle between, you know, like in terms of what you want to do, your identity as a musician, as someone that runs an organization for Cat Factory, and also doing your art practice as well. You talk about socially engaged art practice. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that. You know, what does that actually mean to you?
Yeah, sure. I think you know, maybe a few months ago I went to update my webpage and it's had a sign on it, under construction for the last few months, because I thought, oh, which part do I lead with? You know, how do I position myself? Because I think, you know, for me, my arts practice is, I'm an artist, and so, you know, I explore different things, and you know, my PhD show had sculptural form, video work, sound work, you know. I don't work so much as a musician anymore, although I have to mix a jazz album for somebody in the next couple of weeks, and so I still sometimes record other people, and I like that sculpting aspect of sound. I've recently started some work with the Conservatoire of Music, so that will bring out a bigger sort of sound and music focus for me, but I think that will be in a different kind of way, in an installation way, or out on location, site-specific way, like in rivers. You know, I'm currently building what I'm calling a river organ, which will be an installation that will be installed in the Barker River that allows streams of water to flow down, and when you touch them it plays. It triggers sounds of like silver perch, percussive sounds of silver perch, and different nature sounds to make a composition. But it's from something installed in the river where all of these sort of events have happened. So I'm trying to think about my sound practice in that kind of way. A friend just emailed me and asked me if I'd play a gig at some little bar in Sydney on September the 14th, but I think I'm going to say no. I don't know what to play. Sarah, do you want to do it? And, sorry, was there a question?
I have a question. Yeah. What is it, harmonic oscillator?
The harmonic oscillator?
Yeah.
So the harmonic oscillator, maybe that's what led to me doing my PhD in medicine. So that, I went to the UK for 4 years, once or twice a year. One time there was 3 times I went. And that was for a project around sound levels in hospitals. And so there's all this medical research that tells us about.
So it's for medical purposes?
Sorry?
For healing or for medical purposes?
Well, yeah, so it was about, you know, the sound levels in hospitals, you know, the evidence that shows that they're causing increases in medication, increases in length of hospital stay, and that sort of thing. So they invited me to that hospital as a sound artist to say, well, how might a sound artist think about that? And so, you know, I did a whole bunch of work. Some of it was about direct intervention in the hospital. Some of it was, you know, other quite, well, within that body of work, I think I made the work that changed my entire life, changed my practice actually, which I don't think there's time to get into here, but a story of taking the heartbeat of a girl and palliative care and taking it to the place on earth where sound lasts longer than anywhere else, which is 2 minutes in the north of Scotland, and playing it and re-recording it. And that sound piece becoming a thing when she passed it, her family used as a thing to navigate their grief with.
Yeah.
And so that was installed in a Tate in Liverpool as a sound installation, and the family would come and, you know, and visit that work. And so I think that was a sort of quick rundown of that project.
It's interesting the connection between medical and audible. Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Yeah. Just like the frequency between the audible and the medical, interaction.
Yeah, so hospitals are such loud.
Yeah.
I'd speak with patients who would say, like intensive care patients who would say, well, I was in intensive care for 3 months. I went home and threw out my microwave because I couldn't handle whenever I heard that beeping sound.
Yeah.
I spoke to a nurse who, at the start of the interviews, I would record interviews with people, and she was saying, I never thought about the sound in here, it doesn't impact me. But then when we had conversations, she told me how there was a particular noise on a machine where if it went off, you realised there was an issue with oxygen supply to the brain, and so it was an important sound. You had a very short time to react and to fix whatever the issue was. And she was in a Toys R Us on Christmas Eve with her children, and a beep came over the PA, and then it just activated that stress where she had to leave. And so all of these sort of subconscious things are in people, apart from the medical research that tells us it's having all these other impacts on people. So it was really about, how can we rethink hospital spaces? In my first week there, I had a surgeon come up to me and say, are you the artist from Australia who's here about sound? And I said, yeah. And he said, oh, come with me. And I thought, oh, great, surgeons are getting into this. And he said, when we're on a night shift, ask the most senior person, who it's me, gets to sleep in this room, and this door always creaks. Could you fix it for me? I responded, well, don't you have a maintenance speaker? But we would, some really simple things, like we did workshops with some little kids that were in the hospital, and we mapped out sounds and what they think about sounds, but they would tell us things like, every night I'm woken up by the nurse typing on a keyboard because it's really noisy. So in some wards they have silent keyboards, so we could speak to the hospital and say, oh, you should switch those keyboards over because that group of patients get woken up every single night by that. That's an easy fix. So there were simple things that we addressed as well.
You don't think about it.
Yeah, no, they're just sort of things like they all had a television at the end of the bed. The design of the television, the speaker was on the back, so that means the sound is projected that way to the other bed. So people keep turning the sounds of the televisions up, so you walk through the water, it's like 10 televisions. Yeah. So I think socially engaged art, for me is around. I think that's what it's about. How do we bring our arts practice and all the skills we learn in the studio, but how do we bring it out of the studio and place it in places like that, in the river, after fish kill events, in hospitals, in various sort of spaces, trying to navigate stuff. And then how do we think about presenting work in those, presenting artwork in those, and do we actually prioritise the art making as an outcome? So we actually say we can learn something. So the reason I went to the UK to do that work, because that was a little while ago now, so there was no way at the time I would get access to a hospital in Australia. I had an NHS pass that let me walk into intensive care as an artist. That's amazing. And so, sort of, understanding that. So because that hospital kept saying to me, oh no, don't ask us what we expect from you, we just want to see what you do. We don't want to direct you. And that was quite amazing. So it meant that work is the heartbeat, that change had such a massive impact on me, and that wouldn't have happened if everything was pre-prescribed. It happened because I just got to be there, meet people, build relationships, and then say, hang on, what if we did this? And then, that's where...
Yeah, I think there's an overlap. Some of these pieces here, even though it might not be your intention, but there's a rhythm, almost like a sound, especially that piece there.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, again, that overlap.
Yeah, no, I think sound is, it's interesting. I gave a talk at the Regional Music Summit in Byron Bay a few weeks ago, and Rhoda Davies, I've just forgotten her name. No, Rhoda Roberts, yeah, so it was me and her giving a keynote together, and then in conversation. And I'd mentioned something about that heartbeat work, but told the whole story, and then about the Menindee fish killer work, and her response was, oh, these works, there's a relationship between these works. The Young Girl's Heartbeat in the UK and a Sick River in Australia. So I think this connection, I see that very much in my practice, connections with all these. I don't see my social engaged practice as different from my studio practice, or my sound practice is different from my visual practice, because I think, and what I hear, because around this we worked with the artist Bruce Odland and made a harp out of a fallen river branch, red gum branch, and strung a harpsichord string on it. then submerged in the Murrumbidgee, so the flow of the water played the harp. And so it was a composition made by the flow of the water.
Yeah.
I kind of hear that now when I look at those, because
Well, it's all about sensation, really.
yeah. But I can hear what you're saying. I can hear what you're saying about something being present in those. Like I really do.
Yeah. Okay, we might just open up to the floor to see if there's any other questions for either one of the artists or both of them.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
These works are gouache, or
They're
the
mixed
gouache
with
and acrylic.
oils,
You can't tell the difference.
oils,
and
acrylics,
also it's not
gouache, yeah,
Oh, right.
anything I can find. Bitumen.
So you get into mistake paint from Bunnings too, that it knows cancer.
I've used Bunnings paint, but I have to pay for it, and it really annoys me. So I basically, I hoard everything. So if I have to do some bitumen on something, that I'll keep it and I'll think, what happens when you do this? You know, so I play around with it. I did buy that. It's for locking nuts so that they don't seize. It's like an oil, a lubricant, and it never dries. But I didn't know that. I thought I'll try a bit. And I waited months and months for this thing to dry. It never dries. I had to chuck it in the end because it was so annoying. Yeah. So it does what it says it does. You know, so.
Yeah.
So that one in particular, the darker one next to the one that looks like stamps,
Yeah.
Is that all gouache or that's mixed meat?
It's mixed. Yeah. There's
You can't really
ink
tell.
and.
And you scrape back, you can see the scraping back in there from that brush thing.
Yeah. But again, so I've taken my cues from the samples and I did it in several works. So that one's called Out of the House, because a reference to the house paint, but I've made it into an assemblage or a house crumbling.
Oh, right.
Okay.
So the house is falling down.
Yeah.
And then I call it Out of the House, and in brackets, Pink Moon. And so I did this moon in this one pink colour, because the pink colour is called Pink Orbit. So I just did a moon in the pink orbit and I stuck it up there. So the title of the name of the colour gives me an idea sometimes.
I see.
Yeah.
We'll all be collecting Bunnings cards. That's new,
Well, I know, that's it, because I used to
It's a
collect
new
cards as a kid. It's a collector's item now.
Yeah.
Thank God. Australia, thank you very much.
Any other questions?
So, just
Yeah.
because of talking about communities, and also it seems to me at Scotland Island that there's quite a community of artists there. Is there much interaction?
I don't live there anymore.
Oh, right, okay.
I used to live, I moved about, probably 20 years ago
Right.
now, but
Oh, okay.
there are, yes, there's
Yeah.
a lot. It's a fantastic place to live because it's got such a whole variety of different people. But the people are a little bit, you've got to be a little bit odd to live there because you have to cross the moat every day.
Yeah.
There's no water. You have to collect it off your roof. You have to have septic tanks, and so it's very challenging physically. And I couldn't do it anymore. But it's the best place I've ever lived. Of the 42 homes I've had, it's the best place I've ever lived because there's such a community. I mean, no one locks their doors on the island. Your kids are totally safe. They could be wandering around the island, but you know everyone knows them. So as long as they're water safe, it's the best place to bring up kids. Because we used to live in Petersham, and I developed bronchial asthma there because under the flight path, there's no asthma in my family. But in the end, I ended up in a puff, and I said, we can't bring our kids up here. It's really horrible. So we tumbled across Scotland Island inadvertently and moved there. So my children grew up with the fresh air and the sea, and they both love the bush now. They don't like cities; they like the bush. You know, so it's a positive thing. Yeah. But there is a community, and they have little art shows and different events there. So yeah, it's a great place. Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Anybody else? No. Okay, all right. Thanks very much for coming to join us for this conversation, and if you can put your hand together for both keys, that would be great. Thank you.